The unlikely resistance. The galaxy had never witnessed anything like Earth. While the advanced races of the galaxy were accustomed to swiftly conquering lesser civilizations, humans proved to be a force they couldn't anticipate. From the high command of the Galactic Alliance to the obscure intelligence offices of the distant worlds, Earth had been labeled as primitive. A young species, barely scratching the surface of technological development, it was considered nothing more than a footnote in the grand cosmic scheme. Its people had limited resources, basic weaponry, and were constantly at odds with one another. No one could have foreseen that this seemingly insignificant planet would become the fulcrum upon which the fate of the galaxy would pivot. When the Cian Armada, an ancient biomechanical force, began its invasion of Earth, they were confident of an easy victory. The Armada had subjugated more than 37 species, and their terrifying warships were the pride of the galaxy. Even the most formidable races bowed to the might of their dreadnoughts. The idea that humanity, a race just learning to master fire, could stand in their way was laughable. But what the Cian leaders failed to understand was the essence of humanity itself. A species born from conflict, raised in adversity, and shaped by survival. The humans had not just survived. They had thrived. Their minds, sharp and adaptable, were quick to learn from their mistakes. In their short existence, they had created technologies that rivaled the greatest minds of the universe. They were not just survivors, they were innovators. As the first wave of the Cian invasion force descended upon Earth, their fleet of dreadnoughts darkened the skies, casting shadows over major cities. The sheer size of the Cian ships was enough to incite panic, but what the invaders didn't account for was humanity's ingenuity. While the Cian ships gleamed with the precision of ancient technologies, Earth's defenders were armed with the most unconventional tools. Instead of elite warships, humanity brought forth its own defenses. Civilian ships converted into war machines, cargo haulers transformed into battle-ready vessels, and mining lasers repurposed into powerful energy weapons. Captain Iris Green, one of the Earth's most gifted engineers, stood at the helm of a converted mining freighter. Her fingers danced over the controls, her mind working faster than the algorithms guiding her ship. She had once been a systems engineer for a mining company, drilling for precious metals beneath the surface of Mars. But when the Cian Armada descended upon Earth, everything changed. She and her crew had joined the Earth's defense force, turning their civilian skills into weapons of war. Ready to fight, Iris, her co-pilot, John Klein, said, his voice steady even though the tension in the air was palpable. The freighter was anything but ordinary. Once a simple cargo vessel, it now bristled with homemade weapons, missile pods mounted on the sides, reinforced plating, and the most dangerous modification of all, a massive mining laser that could carve through anything in its path. It had been hastily retrofitted by a team of engineers, but it was as effective as any battle cruiser the Cian Armada could muster. It was the perfect embodiment of humanity's greatest strength, resourcefulness. Captain Green's ship, the Stellar Pioneer, was part of a ragtag fleet of Earth's defenders. The forces weren't an organized army, but instead, a coalition of civilians, engineers, farmers, and technicians who had come together in desperation. They were not warriors by nature, but they were learning to fight in the most brutal and unforgiving way possible. When the battle began, the Cian ships had already established dominance in Earth's atmosphere. Their colossal dreadnoughts unleashed torrents of energy, burning whole cities to the ground. The humans, though, did not retreat. Instead, they struck back with all they had. The Stellar Pioneer launched its first volley of modified missiles, striking one of the smaller Cian vessels. It wasn't a perfect shot, but it was enough to disable the ship's engines, sending it careening into another dreadnought. The ensuing explosion lit up the night sky, signaling to the invaders that Earth was not going to roll over. The invaders were confused. Their strategy had never been countered with such unpredictability. The human ships, although inferior in size, were incredibly nimble. They took advantage of every flaw in the Cian ships, exploiting weaknesses that the invaders had never thought to consider. The humans didn't fight like professional soldiers. They fought like survivors, like people who had learned how to navigate the harshest environments and the most unpredictable circumstances. Commander Vex, leader of the Cian Armada, was in disbelief. His fleet, capable of obliterating entire worlds, was being outmaneuvered by these seemingly primitive humans. It was a spectacle he hadn't witnessed in his entire life. A war of attrition, where strategy and cunning prevailed over brute force. "What is this?" Vex muttered as his holographic display flickered. The Cian ships were starting to fall back, and the humans were pursuing with relentless precision. It was not a battle. It was a new form of warfare, something the Cian Armada had never prepared for. "Report." Vex barked at his communications officer. "We're being outmaneuvered, Commander. The human vessels. They've adapted in ways we didn't foresee. They've re-engineered their civilian ships, using mining lasers, commercial weapons. The tactics, they're completely different from what we've encountered," the officer replied, his voice tinged with panic. Vex clenched his metallic fists. How could this be? These humans had barely mastered space travel, yet they were proving themselves to be fierce adversaries. The more Vex watched the battle unfold, the more he realized this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a lesson. A lesson in the resilience of a species that had not only endured, but had flourished in the face of adversity. The humans had something the Cian Armada didn't: an unshakable will to survive and the ability to adapt quickly. As the battle raged on, a message came through to Vex's command center. It was a transmission from the human ship Memory of Liberty. The transmission was brief, but it sent a ripple of shock throughout the Galactic Council. "Hey, space invaders," the human voice crackled over the speakers. "We've had enough of this. You want to learn about our war? Welcome to Earth. Hope you brought more than just your weapons. We're bringing everything we've got. And trust me, that's more than you think." Vex's eyes narrowed. This was no longer just a war for Earth's survival. It had become something much bigger. The humans were ready for war. Not just any war, but a war they had mastered over millennia. A war of adaptation, of cleverness, of human resilience. The Cian Armada had underestimated them. And now, they would have to face the consequences. The battle for Earth had just begun, and it was clear that the galaxy would never be the same again. The Cian Armada, having been thrown off course by humanity's unexpected defense, was in disarray. What should have been a swift and decisive conquest had become an unfamiliar and dangerous game for them. The once confident and domineering alien force now found themselves struggling to keep up with the humans' chaotic yet effective strategies. The Cian commanders, seasoned veterans of countless battles, could not comprehend the tenacity of the humans they had underestimated so thoroughly. They were dealing with something they had never faced before, a species that turned every disadvantage into an advantage. Back on Earth, the scale of the conflict had taken on an entirely different dimension. The initial resistance that had been mounted from hastily converted civilian vessels now gave way to a united front of improvisation and innovation. As humanity rallied together, every corner of the planet began to respond. The human spirit was being tested, but instead of breaking, it grew stronger. The world's greatest minds, scientists, engineers, hackers, strategists, and former soldiers, joined forces, pooling their knowledge and resources. The global defense forces rapidly adapted their strategies, realizing that they could no longer rely on conventional methods of warfare. The human race wasn't bound by the constraints of formal military doctrine. Instead, they leveraged their greatest asset, creativity. Captain Iris Green and her crew on the Stellar Pioneer were quickly becoming symbols of the Earth's resistance. Their ship, a mining freighter now equipped with advanced weaponry, had already managed to damage 2 Cian dreadnoughts. But this was only the beginning. The humans had learned from every skirmish, refining their tactics and improving their ships as they went along. "We've got their attention now," Iris said as she stared at the holographic display in front of her. "And they're not used to being this unsettled. We need to keep them on the defensive. Jonah Klein, her co-pilot, was at the helm, adjusting the ship's course. I've been thinking about that. We're too slow to keep up with their big ships, but we can't just run and hide. If we can sabotage their communication systems, we might be able to cause chaos in their ranks. Iris nodded. Exactly. We'll need to get in close, use our agility against their size. But it's risky. If we can get to their fleet's command ship, we might have a chance at disrupting their entire operation. The idea was daring, but it was the kind of thinking humanity was now relying on, thinking outside the box. The humans had no massive warships, no advanced battle technology that could rival the Cian fleet head-on, but they had something more valuable: ingenuity. The key to their survival would not be in outmatching the Shens at their own game, but in forcing them to play by human rules, a game they were unfamiliar with and unprepared for. The first step toward victory. The fleet of human vessels, now dubbed the Freedom Fleet, was an assortment of repurposed ships, each one different from the other. There were cargo haulers, luxury liners, mining ships, and even fishing boats that had been hastily converted into warships. They were an eclectic mix, but they were united by one thing: their determination to protect their planet. The alien invaders, with their biomechanical ships and terrifying weapons, had initially written them off as insignificant. But now, they were learning that humanity's strength lay in its unpredictability. "I've never seen anything like this," said Vex as he reviewed the reports from his command center. The holographic display in front of him flickered, showing images of Earth's defenders making their way through the chaos. His fleet had suffered damage, but what alarmed him most was the fact that the humans weren't retreating. They weren't surrendering. They were adapting, evolving their tactics in real time. "They're not supposed to be this smart," Vex muttered. "What kind of species is this?" The human response had confounded the Cian Armada. While the aliens had expected to face a world of primitive beings with no concept of coordinated defense, what they found instead was a species that had, over centuries, mastered the art of survival in an unforgiving world. Humans had faced extinction events, wars, and catastrophic natural disasters. Each time, they had emerged stronger. Now, they were applying those lessons to an entirely new kind of war. The humans had learned to work together in ways no one had imagined. Engineers and farmers shared their knowledge of systems and survival. Hackers teamed up with military veterans, applying unconventional strategies to disrupt the enemy. One group of human pilots, former aerial stunt performers, had even devised new aerial combat maneuvers, using speed and agility to strike at the Cian ships from unpredictable angles. They used everything they had at their disposal, from ancient military strategies to the latest technologies, blending them into something new, something that the Shins had no way of preparing for. The most astounding part of the human resistance was their ability to adapt on the fly. After the initial invasion, the Earth's defense teams began to reverse engineer the weapons left behind by the alien forces. In a matter of weeks, human engineers were able to develop new technologies that could pierce the Cian's biometal armor. Makeshift energy weapons, plasma-based rifles, and even EMP devices became standard issue for Earth's new military. What had once been a species barely capable of space travel was now developing technologies on par with the galaxy's finest civilizations. A new kind of war. Captain Green's mission to infiltrate the Cian flagship grew ever more urgent. The Stellar Pioneer had successfully completed several covert strikes against the Cian fleet, disrupting supply lines and communications, but now the time had come to strike at the heart of the invasion. The Stellar Pioneer made its way toward the heart of the Cian fleet, an enormous warship known as the Exemplar, the pride of the Cian Armada. It was a ship unlike anything the humans had ever seen. Its surface a mass of metallic growths that shimmered like living tissue, its weapons capable of annihilating entire cities in the blink of an eye. The Exemplar had been designed for one purpose: to command and control the Cian fleet. If humanity could destroy it, they would effectively cripple the invasion. But the Exemplar was heavily guarded. Its defensive systems were nearly impenetrable. Every Cian ship in the fleet was designed to protect it, and as the stellar pioneer moved closer, the tension on board was palpable. "Are we sure about this?" Jonah asked, his voice tinged with doubt. "Taking down the Exemplar will cripple their fleet, but it's the most dangerous mission we've ever faced." "We're sure," Iris replied. "This is what we've been building toward. The Cians think they've already won, but we're going to show them that they've underestimated us." The next few hours were crucial. As the stellar pioneer closed in on the Exemplar, Earth's fleet launched a diversionary attack, drawing the attention of the Cian forces and giving the stellar pioneer the window it needed to get close. Human ingenuity was on full display as the ship's crew initiated a daring plan to infiltrate the Cian warship, using cloaking technology and small, agile vessels to breach its outer defenses. Inside the Exemplar, a human infiltration team snuck through its corridors, placing explosives in key locations. The plan was simple: disable the Exemplar's central command core, causing a cascade failure in its systems. But time was running out, and every step brought them closer to a potentially catastrophic confrontation with the Cian forces. As Iris and her team made their way to the heart of the ship, they knew that this could be humanity's only chance at survival. The fate of the planet and the galaxy rested in their hands. The heart of the beast. The stellar pioneer hurtled toward the heart of the Cian Armada, weaving through swarms of enemy ships, each one seemingly more formidable than the last. The sky around Earth had turned into a war zone. What had once been a peaceful blue sphere in the vastness of space was now the epicenter of one of the most brutal conflicts the galaxy had ever seen. The Cians had not expected humanity to fight back with such ferocity, and they certainly didn't anticipate the kind of ingenuity Earth's defenders brought to the table. The human fleet had grown stronger by the day. While they still lacked the sheer firepower of the Cians, they had learned to be fast, unpredictable, and relentless. But as Captain Iris Green guided the stellar pioneer toward the massive Cian flagship, the Exemplar, she knew that the true test of humanity's will was yet to come. The Exemplar was no ordinary warship. It was a biomechanical behemoth, pulsing with dark energy, its surface a blend of living metal and organic tissue. Its weapons were capable of eradicating entire cities with a single strike, and its defenses were nearly impenetrable. The ship was the heart of the Cian Armada, the command center where Vex, their supreme commander, monitored every aspect of the invasion. If humanity had any hope of winning, they needed to disable the Exemplar. But getting to it would be no easy task. The Exemplar was surrounded by an impenetrable cloud of smaller Cian ships, each one capable of destroying anything in its path. There was no way for the stellar pioneer to approach the flagship undetected. The mission was reckless, even by human standards, but there was no alternative. "We've got one shot at this," Iris said, her voice calm but determined as she turned to her crew. "We've come this far, and we're not backing down now. Once we breach the Exemplar's defenses, we'll have seconds to place the explosives. If we fail, the Cian Armada will wipe us out before we even get close." Jonah Klein, her co-pilot, nodded. His face was grim, but his resolve was unshaken. "Let's make sure we don't fail, Captain." Iris turned back to the control panel, adjusting the ship's course and speed. The plan was simple: use a series of cloaking devices and decoys to slip through the Cian defense lines and board the Exemplar. Once inside, a small team would infiltrate the flagship, plant the explosives, and escape before the countdown reached 0. They would be in and out like shadows, and they couldn't afford to waste time or make a single mistake. But as they neared the Exemplar, the weight of their mission settled over her. She had led missions before, had commanded ships into battle. But this was different. The stakes were higher than anything she had ever faced. If they failed, it wouldn't just be the stellar pioneer that would fall. Earth itself would be lost to the Cian invaders. The survival of the entire human race was hanging by a thread. The Cian Command Center, Inside the Exemplar, Vex was growing increasingly impatient. His fleet had encountered unexpected resistance from the humans, but he had no doubt they would eventually crumble. The Shans had crushed entire civilizations with ease in the past. This was no different. Yet, as he watched the human fleet's movements on his command console, he felt a strange sensation. The humans were adapting too quickly, their tactics too unpredictable. They had been learning, improving with every skirmish. "Report," Vex ordered, his voice low and tense. His command officer, a hulking figure clad in biomechanical armor, stepped forward with a data pad in hand. "We've detected an anomaly, Commander. One of their ships, the Stellar Pioneer, is heading directly for the Exemplar," the officer said, his voice tinged with confusion. "It's using cloaking technology to avoid detection, but we've still managed to track it." Vex's eyes narrowed. What is their strategy? "They are trying to infiltrate the flagship. It appears they're going to plant explosives within the core systems." Vex clenched his fists. He had underestimated humanity, but this was something entirely new. He had not expected them to attempt such a direct strike at the heart of his fleet. The Exemplar was the most fortified ship in the galaxy. No one, not even the most advanced species in the universe, had ever been bold enough to assault it head-on. "Prepare the defenses," Vex barked. "Activate all cloaking systems and increase the frequency of our scanner sweeps. We will not let them succeed." But despite his commands, Vex couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he had already lost. The humans were unlike any species he had encountered before. They weren't bound by conventional strategies or the rules of war. They had a drive, a passion that made them dangerous. And as the Stellar Pioneer continued its approach, he realized that the humans were playing a game of their own, a game that the Shans were losing. The infiltration begins. Captain Green's plan had begun. The Stellar Pioneer powered down its engines, gliding silently through space as it approached the Exemplar. The crew remained still, barely breathing, as they neared the massive Cian flagship. Every move had to be calculated. Every second counted. "Cloaking systems activated," Jonna Klein reported. The ship shimmered, its outline disappearing into the vastness of space. The Exemplar loomed ahead, its enormous bulk casting a shadow that seemed to stretch across the stars. The crew's hearts raced. This was the moment they had been preparing for. The stakes were too high. Failure wasn't an option. As they closed the distance to the Exemplar, a low hum vibrated through the ship, a sound of tension, of anticipation. The humans knew the risk, and they were willing to take it. Iris gave the signal. The cloaking system flickered briefly, and then the Stellar Pioneer was hidden once again, like a whisper in the void. They were almost within range. "We're in position," Iris said, her voice steady despite the growing pressure. "On my mark, we deploy the decoys. We're going in." The decoys were small, drone-like devices designed to mimic the signatures of larger ships. They would confuse the Cian defense systems, drawing attention away from the Stellar Pioneer and giving the crew just enough time to breach the Exemplar. As the decoys shot forward, the Stellar Pioneer slid through the gaps between them, moving closer to the heart of the enemy ship. It was a dangerous game of cat and mouse, but humanity's greatest weapon was its ability to outthink its enemies. While the Shans relied on brute strength and fear, the humans thrived on adaptation, on thinking in ways their enemies could not. Minutes passed like hours. As the Stellar Pioneer passed through the outer defense zones, the crew could feel the tension mounting. Every sensor, every scan, every flicker of light on their displays was a potential threat. Yet they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that this was their only chance. "We're inside the Exemplar's outer ring," Joma said, his fingers flying over the control panel. "We've made it past their initial defenses. Now we just have to get to the core." Captain Green nodded, her face steely with determination. "This is it. No turning back now. Let's do this." As the crew of the Stellar Pioneer moved deeper into the belly of the beast, they were faced with the terrifying reality that they were about to face the Cian war machine head-on. But with each passing moment, they grew more certain of one thing. Their ingenuity, their resilience, was the weapon that could tip the scales. Inside the Exemplar, they would have mere moments to plant the explosives and escape. The fate of Earth, of humanity, depended on their success.